everyone, John Hart here. This is just an introduction to my book, The Art of the Storyboard. We're going to give you some salient features of it, and here is a short video.
They want it done instantly by hand. So we have to convince people. There's software out there that does it for you on the computer, but they insist it's done by hand. It goes back to Disney. Because the concept of what we have, our imagination in the brain, goes directly to the paper. Then from the storyboards, which they again put on a big wall for story continuity, and that's what they want to see. Alfred Hitchcock did it. Current directors like John Cameron, Avatar, want that visualization in front of them when they shoot. They have it set up, they know what they're doing when they get on the set. They're not going to get on the set, unfortunately, like Fellini used to do, and say, what are we going to do next? But he had it in his head what he was going to do. But now they want it visualized. So that's the art of the storyboard. And I frankly have to give my students basic drawing lessons on drawing the human figure. I talk about perspective, that they want depth behind the figures that are being shot. They want depth of field. You have to know about depth of field, how much what they want focused in the background. So these are basic design, and the design element, the principle of 1/3, 2/3, very important. How to frame the shot, foreground, middle ground, and background. That's reality. We want a 3D image, foreground, middle ground, and background. That's reality. Around us is broken up into those three basic things. We frame the shot, foreground. We place our figures in the middle ground, and we have a background behind them. So that's the basic essence of the art of the storyboard, and learning exactly what it does for visualizing the concept of the script, the continuity of the script for the director.
Here's some examples. There's Ridley Scott on the set of The Gladiator. You notice the storyboards listed there with him. Now here are some three-dimensional drawings, but for storyboards you can do simple stick figures, and here is an example. We'll see some more later. Get yourself a model, a wooden model. Again, here's an example of just doing simple stick figures if your drawing abilities are minimal. A few more examples. Here is a board. You can come back to this. It shows you how to make from stick figures to full figures, remembering the principle of thirds. Here's another example. You can come back to this again and again. Stick figures again. The simple storyboards can be very simply drawn as here. Here's an example of commercial storyboards. A little bit of Spanish here for our Spanish friends. Here is an example of storyboard. What we want, each frame should flow into the other. It's a succession of frames. This is my grouping on the illusion of depth. A conch shell is made up of thirds. We're talking about the principle of thirds. The Acropolis, the Parthenon, they're made up of thirds. 2/3 pillars, 1/3 pediment. Here's an example of the fact that you've got to be aware of the horizon line. Here's a simple figure going toward the horizon line, and the vanishing point is the star. Now we're going to talk about
your narrative.
Proportion. Again,
you're going to want some narrative continuity, and I've typed that in here. I've put that in here. Narrative continuity. You're going to have a series of frames that are going to make up the entire picture. So 100 to 200 frames average. But what goes on within that frame is very important, and that is the composition of the frame. Now, all professionals still use the old Greek principle of thirds. Principle of thirds, 3, divided into 3 sections. Either 3 sections horizontally or vertically. I have done this by hand, and you can too on your sketch pads. It's done by hand. You can do it without a ruler if you practice. Now we're going to divide this into thirds. Now in any composition, any professional composition, if we're doing a landscape, this is my land. That's going to take up the bottom third of our rectangle. This is sometimes called the divine proportion. The divine proportion. 1/3. The sky is going to take up 2/3. 1/3, 2/3. Never break it up in the middle. That's amateursville. Now we're going to erase this quickly. I don't want this one to go on too long. Be a little slightly shaky because it's a handheld. Now, back to our, you can use, this is bamboo capture, or you can use Photoshop. The same type of setup, colors and tools. So I'm picking a pencil tool. Now, the opposite is true. If I'm doing this landscape, I have 2/3 land and 1/3 sky. I've got some sun in here maybe and some clouds and trees here in the foreground. But that's my split. That's my proportion. 1/3 sky, 2/3 landscape. Now very quickly, sketch on your pads as I do on my screen here, or on your screen if you have one. So this is our framing for the first shot. Our first shot is usually called the establishing shot. You let the audience know where you're located, where the locale of the action is. So in each of these frames they have to follow these proportions. Now very quickly, I'm going to erase what we have here quickly. I'm going to pick my eraser tool. And we'll find out the same thing works in a frame vertically. Back to our pencil tool. Divide this proportionally into 3 also. And this time, let's just, for fun, we're going to connect these lines. I have a reason for that. Whoops, okay. Keep practicing, you'll make them straight too. Alright, now, the same thing works vertically as horizontally. If I have buildings here, they'll take up 1/3. And then the rest is landscape. Or I have 2/3 buildings here and 1/3 landscape here. Buildings, park, 2/3, 1/3. So this, or 2/3, 1/3 this way. Later on I want to talk about placement of your center of interest. Any one of those, very quickly in one of these, but never in the center. No. Wrong. All right. So that's our divine proportion. You can keep going over this, these notes, if you've taken them either on your sketch pad or your computer pad space. So that's the divine proportion. 2/3, 1/3. Did I go down a little bit? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Finished with lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, we're going to go into what we call the horizon line and the vanishing point that we all see. The two eyes, very quickly, I'll explain this later, are two eyes between the, look toward a vanishing point. I also call this horizon line or the infinity line. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Here we're talking about the horizon line. The bar on the top of the railing is your horizon line. That goes back to infinity. The red marks are your vanishing points. The point here is when you move, your vanishing point moves. Here's an example of a horizon, an actual horizon. Your eyesight, your two eyes take an 180-degree view. And this illustrates that. We're looking at the vanishing point on the horizon line. They're the two eyes toward the horizon line. And again, I suggest you come back to these drawings if it's not completely given to you in these illustrations. Come back and look again. Here's an example of one-point perspective from an early film. One point perspective goes up to the sky on that one. Now we're going to go to hand-drawn illustrations. This is on proportion and the center of interest. Here are 3 frames, taking up the middle ground, background, and the foreground. When they're put together, this is the complete shot. This is from a famous film on the Civil War. Here are some color concept sketches. Notice that we've paid attention to the principle of thirds. The girl is off-centered to the right, lower right. Here she's slightly off-centered to the left. As an overhead view, she meets this astronaut, and they're interviewed by camera, again, slightly to the left. Center of interest. Now here's some examples from my book. This is from North by Northwest. That's Rashomon shading with a watercolor pencil. There, the queen is off-center to the left. And this is another, again, a reminder that each frame should have its own flow into the next frame. That's storyboarding, illustrating the script or the narrative. Again, we can go back to simple stick figures to make your point in the story line. Reminder, draw by hand. This was done a digital painting of Sajat Ray, the famous Indian Bengali director. So good shooting. Thanks for listening.